Even though I was still living at home when I turned 40, my younger sister Mary always looked down on me. One of the reasons I hadn't married was because of her, but she used that to mock and ridicule me. Ever since I suggested we cut ties, she hasn't been involved with me at all. Then one day Mary showed up and announced, "I'm going to live here now. But since I'm expecting a child, there's not enough room. So, Sarah, you need to move out within 3 days." When I told our parents about it, they were taken aback and said, "Then we'll move out too." I was relieved to hear that. Mary, unaware that both our parents would leave, will be in for a shock. She probably can't imagine a future where she ends up unhappy. My name is Sarah. I have a younger sister, Mary, who is 5 years younger than me. Unlike me, with my average height, weight, and ordinary face, Mary has a model-like figure and a cute face, and she's always been treated kindly by others. Relatives always doted on the adorable Mary more than they did on me. Even our grandparents, I believe, adored Mary more. Friends and acquaintances wanting to get close to Mary often compared our looks, mocking me and boosting her ego. Over time, Mary began to believe she was superior in everything compared to me. However, even though Mary was praised more for her looks, I was the more serious one and excelled in academics. Mary would pester our parents, saying, "Show me the grades Sarah got when she was my age." When they did, it turned out my grades were better. In her anger, Mary sometimes tore up my certificates right then and there. Our parents feared that if this continued, Mary's negative behavior would persist into adulthood. My dad was often like, "Stop comparing yourself to Sarah all the time. Mary is Mary and Sarah is Sarah. It's silly to compare." When Mary compared our looks and was like, "Sarah, you're really ugly. Can you please not call yourself my sister?" My mom scolded her and was like, "Mary, if you keep up with this bad attitude, no matter how cute you are now, people will quickly see how ugly your personality is and won't want to be around you." However, even though Mom and Dad tried their best to correct Mary's behavior, most of our relatives took Mary's side. And above all, our grandparents absolutely adored Mary. I don't know what Mary said to them, but our grandparents were like, "It's terrible to be so hard on Mary. Maybe you're just jealous of her. Why don't you send Sarah away?" to my parents. Before we knew it, our grandparents started giving allowance and gifts only to Mary but not to me. Upon seeing this, my dad was furious. He was like, "How can you treat the same grandchildren differently based on their looks? Are you really my parents? We're done," and he decided to cut ties with our grandparents. Since then, we've never been to our grandparents' house or attended any family gatherings. Mary seemed unhappy about it, but since Mom and Dad were firm on their decision, she probably realized that making a fuss on her own would be pointless. When Mary reached middle school, it seemed she wanted to be adored in circles outside of our family. At Mary's middle school, the reputation she had differed vastly between boys and girls. The boys referred to Mary as the best girl they'd like to date in school, while the girls seemed to label her as a mean girl. By the time Mary started middle school, I was already in high school. I only heard these rumors when I learned that one of my classmates had a younger brother attending Mary's middle school. Apparently, the rumors about Mary were widespread throughout the school. From what I gathered, whenever a friend of hers got a boyfriend, within just a few days, that boyfriend was dating Mary. In short, Mary had been snatching away her friends' boyfriends. At first, she was only doing it to her close friends' boyfriends, but as she ran out of female friends, she began targeting any girl she could find who had a boyfriend. Honestly, when I heard this, even though she's my younger sister, I was like, yeah, she'd probably do something like that, as Mary used to try and take my stuff all the time. The crayons and paints I get would often end up being used by her. It seems like she's always had a knack for taking things from others. However, even after I told our parents about Mary's reputation at school and they got mad at her, I doubted she was going to reflect on her actions. I mean, she's been like this forever. I believe her arrogant nature might be due to our relatives and grandparents always praising her too much, but those relatives and grandparents aren't going to look after her forever. She needs to realize soon that her attitude is self-destructive or her future might be in jeopardy. That's why, hoping for some change, I'd talk to our parents about what was being said of Mary at school. That evening, our parents confronted her, asking if the rumors about her at school were true. I thought she might dodge the question, but listening from behind the door, Mary was like, "Those guys just say I'm better than their exes, right? It just means I'm a better catch, doesn't it? Why lecture me instead of confronting the school when you realize your daughter is being badmouthed? Do you even really care about me?" She didn't seem to feel any guilt about stealing boyfriends at all. Even though those rumors exist because of her actions, she still had the nerve to blame our parents who were trying to discipline her. Both Mom and Dad were dumbfounded by Mary's logic. Every time Mary caused another issue, our parents tried to advise her, but she never listened. At this point, both our parents and I thought her behavior was beyond correction. But our concerns for Mary only lasted until she graduated high school. With college, she announced she was going to live with an older boyfriend near her university. She persuaded our parents and left home. She never came back. Even in her graduating year, she didn't contact us. I don't even know if Mary managed to graduate and get a job. Since my parents were paying for tuition, it seemed they knew that Mary would eventually graduate from college. However, they were taken aback by Mary's lack of communication with the family. They were like, "We really can't imagine a person like this succeeding in the real world." But at the same time, they were also like, "If she's not going to reach out from her end, that's fine. We don't need to force a relationship on her." So they decided to leave Mary be. But Mary, who had usually brushed off whatever happened at home, keenly returned to our childhood house when I brought my fiancé, Thomas. Apparently, a relative who lived close to our home and adored Mary had seen me bring a man, seemingly my boyfriend, home. They immediately informed Mary. "Is this guy your boyfriend, Sarah? He's incredibly handsome. He looks like he's got his act together, too. I'm surprised he wants to marry you." Without hesitation, Mary, who had suddenly appeared at our house, spotted Thomas. While I was away from my seat, she took my spot and snugly wrapped her arm around Thomas, showering him with compliments. Even when our mom and dad told her to stop, she was like, "If he's going to marry Sarah, he'll be my big brother, right? I just want to get along with him as family from now on." She didn't let go of Thomas. Moreover, when I returned from the restroom and was firmly like, "Mary, let him go," she started to fake cry. She was like, "You always do this. Everyone always treats me so unfairly." Thomas watched in confusion as the situation unfolded. The gathering soon dispersed and I asked Thomas to leave. My parents were furious with Mary. I felt relieved thinking the matter was settled, but 3 months before our wedding, I suddenly received a message from Thomas wanting to call off our engagement. When I told him I couldn't accept this just through a message on WhatsApp, Thomas was like, "Then let's meet at a cafe tomorrow." The next day, I went to a cafe at the appointed time. When I arrived, Mary and Thomas were already there, sitting close and smiling at each other. Thomas looked serious when he saw me, while Mary had a smug expression. Thomas was like, "I can't see myself living with you, especially after how you treated your sister Mary and how your parents reacted. That's why I want to break off our engagement," Thomas said earnestly. Mary smirked at his words. Having seen them cozying up in the cafe earlier, my love for Thomas had already gone cold. I was like, "So how much are you going to pay me for breaking our engagement?" Thomas was like, "Compensation? We aren't even married. We haven't even had the wedding, and it can still be canceled," his eyes widening in surprise. I sighed deeply and replied, "We exchanged engagement rings. We introduced each other to our parents, and we had a wedding planned. When an engagement is called off in such a situation, the one causing the breakup has to pay compensation. I tried to explain it patiently, but Thomas, looking dumbfounded, was like, "If we're talking about the cause, it's on you. It's because you didn't treat Mary right. There's no way that's the reason. You cheated on me with Mary, so the breakup is on you." It seemed that Thomas was more upset about being the reason for the breakup than about paying compensation. We argued in the cafe about it, all the while Mary was clinging to Thomas, making it clear that they were the root of the problem. I decided to call Thomas's parents to the cafe to judge who was in the wrong. Even though Thomas was their son, they must have realized the situation was inexcusable, as he had brought another woman to a serious talk about breaking off an engagement and remained close to her throughout. "Sarah, we're truly sorry for what our son has done. He's talking nonsense right now, but we promise to pay for his sin," they assured me. A few days later, I decided to hire a lawyer for this matter, and eventually a court awarded me a certain amount. I was told that Mary and Thomas still didn't agree with the situation, but it was likely that Thomas's parents covered the payment for him. With that, I thought I'd never involve myself with Mary or the backstabbing Thomas ever again. Both my dad and mom had said they disowned Mary for stealing my fiancé Thomas. I thought Mary would never return to our family home again. However, when I was around 40, working at home, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was a blocked call, but I thought it might be work-related, so I decided to answer it. Then I heard a familiar female voice on the other end. "Hey, I bet you're still doing well. Because of me, you missed out on marriage, right? You've probably been single all these years. Such a pitiful life living alone." The mocking tone made me instantly realize it was Mary. Only she made fun of me like that and called me in this tone. I was like, "What do you want? If you've got no business, I'm going to hang up." Mary was like, "Hang on, what I've got to tell you might just change your life. You'll regret it if you hang up now." If she was going this far, there was no reason not to listen. Given her audacity, I felt compelled and was like, "What's that?" "I'm moving back to our family home, but since I'm expecting a child, there isn't enough room, so you need to leave within 3 days. See, I'm pregnant. For our parents, it's the grandchild they've been waiting for. I'm doing what a single woman like you couldn't." "What are you talking about? You were disowned, remember." "Since I can give them the grandchild you couldn't, I'm sure they'll welcome me with open arms. If I ask them to kick you out, I bet they'll do it," she replied confidently. I seriously doubted that. Both Mom and Dad were furious about Mary stealing Thomas away from me. They were like, "That's an unimaginably low act for any human. They wouldn't simply forgive Mary because she's having a child." Moreover, even though my engagement breakup was caused by Mary, she didn't feel guilty. Moreover, the damages were paid by Thomas, or more precisely, by Thomas's parents. Mary never apologized to me, nor did she make amends for her actions. This had always angered my parents. Even if she showed up now, they'd probably just guide her to the door to leave, but Mary seemed convinced that our parents would be on her side and was like, "So make room for me." No place for a single woman in our family home, and without hearing my reply, she hung up. Although I was reluctant, I talked to my dad and mom that I'd been contacted by Mary, that she was apparently pregnant, and that she was coming back to our house and told me to leave so that she could get a room for the child. Both my dad and mom looked absolutely shocked for a moment, but after a short pause, as if thinking this was unbelievable, they shrugged and were like, "Well, guess we got to leave too." I was relieved to hear those words. It seemed like Dad and Mom weren't really on Mary's side after all. My mom was like, "When did Mary say she'll be back?" Only then did I realize Mary hadn't told me exactly when she'd return. I honestly told my mom that I was told to leave within 3 days. Mom was like, "In that case, we better start packing soon." My mom was also like, knowing Mary, even if Sarah doesn't leave this house, she'll barge in, make herself at home, and force Sarah out. We don't want to live with her, and Dad, sitting next to her, nodded in agreement. From that moment on, we started our moving preparations at a breakneck speed, since we didn't know when Mary might show up. We reached out to Thomas's parents using the contact information we had kept for emergencies. What we found out was quite a shocker. Turns out Thomas's dad is a big company CEO, and Thomas had been groomed every day to be the next CEO. He met me and we got engaged, but then he cheated on me with my sister, leading to our broken engagement. They believed he couldn't be trusted as a professional, so he got demoted to a regular employee or something, but it seems he had been hiding this from Mary. Mary always talked about the CEO Thomas as if he's some big deal, so he must have thought she'd leave him if she found out he wasn't going to be CEO. But Mary, believing Thomas would become a CEO and make lots of money, had been making extravagant purchases. Somehow Thomas was dipping into his savings to fund Mary's spending spree, but when he ran out of money, he tried to talk her into saving. However, she snapped back at him and was like, "If you're going to be a CEO, you should have money, right?" And in the heat of the moment, Thomas was apparently like, "The reason I'm not going to be CEO is because I was going to marry you." By that time, they had found out that Mary was pregnant, so they decided against divorce, but she was like, "I'm going back to my parents' house for a while. You're broke, right? I bet my parents, who can support my single sister, have some money." And now it seems she's living in a hotel. After a while, when relatives near our home confirmed I was moving, I suppose she was planning to come to my place. And yet I wonder if she thinks of me as a jobless loser or something. She can't fathom the idea that I might be making money on my own. Perhaps she's always thought of her sister, me, as lesser than her. Since Mary isn't working now, she probably assumed that I'm not only jobless, but also unmarried and living off my parents. That's not the case, though. After we moved, I got a call from an unknown number. Answering it, sure enough, it was Mary. "Hey, I see the house is up for sale. Where are Mom and Dad?" Mom and Dad, they moved to a place they've always dreamed of. I didn't hear about that. Why would I tell someone I've cut ties with? It seems Mary went to our old family home and finally realized it was on sale. Well, if there's a sign of "for sale" in front of the house, anyone would get that no one's living there anymore. Are you still clinging to Mom and Dad? Nope, me, I decided to follow my husband on his overseas assignment. Wait, husband? She must have assumed I was still single, but it's been a few years since Mary stole Thomas from me. In that time, I found someone special, and we've been married for 3 years now. Given that our child is still young, I initially held off on traveling abroad. My husband went ahead, but now it seems all right to take our child and join him. I was like, "I have no intention of helping you, nor do our parents. Just do your best with your beloved husband, okay?" and hung up. I canceled my cell phone service before leaving the country and set off for overseas. I still occasionally hear from Thomas's parents, so I get updates about Thomas and Mary. Without a family home to return to and no knowledge of where her parents or sister are, Mary is left with only Thomas to rely on. After Mary drained all our savings, Thomas had a wake-up call. He told me, "We won't divorce since we're having a child, but from now on, you're on an allowance." Most of that allowance went towards repaying the money I squandered, so I was left with nothing. While taking care of our child, I had to work and live with my in-laws. Now I'm working hard every day to pay off what I owe. I guess a marriage based on deceit never really turns out well, huh?
Hey, take care of this, will you? Daniel, my husband of 8 years, barely looked at me as he flung his leather bag across the room, its contents scattering like fallen leaves in autumn. The bag landed with a thud, papers spilling out onto the hardwood floor. I sighed, a familiar sense of resignation washing over me. Lately, this was how our conversations usually began, or rather his orders. I bent down, gathering the strewn papers, when a particular document caught my eye. It was stark, official-looking, and utterly unexpected, a divorce paper. My heart sank. Then, oddly, a wave of relief followed. The kind of relief you feel when a long-dreaded inevitability finally stares you in the face. Daniel's part was already filled in. He had made his decision, without so much as a conversation. The realization stung, but it was also liberating in a strange way. Without a second thought, I found myself reaching for a pen. My hand trembled slightly as I filled in my details. "Sarah Thompson," I wrote, my name etching the end of an era. I paused, looking at the man I once thought I knew. Daniel was lounging on the sofa, mindlessly flipping through TV channels. The man who had once been my partner, my confidant, had become a stranger. "Sarah, what's for dinner?" His voice, devoid of warmth, pulled me back to the present. I turned to him, the divorce paper still in my hand. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "What about?" "This." I held up the paper. His expression changed from indifference to surprise, and then to something I couldn't quite decipher. "You found that, huh?" he finally said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yes, I did, and I've made my decision," I replied, my own voice laced with a firm resolve I didn't know I had. The room filled with a heavy silence, one that spoke volumes more than our brief exchange of words. It was the silence of a chapter closing, of a new beginning taking shape amidst the ruins of the old. As I stood there, holding the symbol of our failed marriage, I realized this was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my own destiny. The silence lingered in the air long after Daniel had retreated to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The stillness of the room was a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I sat down on the couch, the divorce papers still clutched in my hand, and my mind began to drift back to the beginning, to the days when everything seemed so promising. We had met at a networking event for professionals. Daniel, with his charismatic smile and confident demeanor, had seemed like a breath of fresh air. "Sarah Thompson, right? I've heard a lot about your marketing skills," he had said, extending a hand that I shook, unaware of how significantly this moment would alter my life. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and soon we were meeting for coffee, then dinner, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. Daniel was attentive, kind, always knowing what to say to make me laugh. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found someone who understood me so well. As I sat on the couch, lost in the memories of our early days, a stark realization hit me. Those days were long gone, replaced by a cold indifference that had crept into our marriage so subtly that I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I thought back to the little things that started to change after our wedding, the way Daniel's sweet messages became less frequent, how our conversations turned from deep and engaging to functional and brief. It was a gradual shift, one that didn't alarm me at first. I had convinced myself that this was just what happened in marriages over time. Comfort, I told myself, often replaced passion. But comfort didn't mean disrespect. It didn't mean coming home to a husband who barely acknowledged your existence unless he needed something. The man I had fallen in love with, who had promised to be my partner in life, had slowly morphed into someone I no longer recognized. The sound of a car outside snapped me back to reality. I glanced at the clock. It was late. I had been sitting there, lost in thought, for hours. The house was quiet, Daniel likely asleep, uncaring of the storm he had unwittingly unleashed in me. I stood up, my resolve strengthening. The Sarah who walked into this room a few hours ago was not the same Sarah now. The discovery of the divorce papers had opened my eyes to a truth I had been avoiding. Our marriage was over, and it was time for me to reclaim my life. I placed the divorce papers on the table, a symbolic gesture of my readiness to face whatever came next. Tomorrow, I would start the process of untangling my life from Daniel's. It would be challenging, but I knew I had to do it, not just for my own sake, but for the woman I once was and the woman I needed to become again. As I headed to bed, a sense of determination filled me. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but I was ready to face them head-on. This was not just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The morning light spilled into the bedroom, casting a warm glow on the walls. It was a new day, but the weight of my decision still rested heavily on my shoulders. As I made my way to the kitchen, the house felt unusually quiet, almost as if it were holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Daniel was already up, sitting at the dining table, his eyes fixated on the morning paper. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, a stark reminder of the distance that had grown between us. I busied myself with making coffee, the familiar routine providing a semblance of normalcy in the chaos of my emotions. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, a comforting presence in an otherwise tense atmosphere. "Sarah," Daniel's voice broke the silence, his tone surprisingly soft. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "Yes?" "We need to talk about this," he said, gesturing towards the divorce papers that lay between us. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Yes, we do." The conversation that followed was a far cry from the heated arguments we had become accustomed to. Instead, it was a candid, albeit painful, acknowledgement of where we had ended up. Daniel spoke of his frustrations, his sense of being trapped in a life he hadn't envisioned. I listened, not with the intent to argue, but to understand. As he spoke, I couldn't help but wonder how we had missed the signs. The late nights at the office, the weekends spent apart, the growing silences at dinner, they were all telltale signs of a marriage unraveling at the seams. "I just feel like we're living separate lives under the same roof," Daniel finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I feel the same," I replied, the truth of my words hitting me with full force. We were two strangers sharing a life that no longer existed. The conversation shifted to practicalities, the house, our finances, the inevitable legal proceedings. It was a surreal experience, discussing the end of our marriage with a calmness that belied the turmoil within. As the morning turned into afternoon, we reached a mutual understanding. The divorce was inevitable, but we would handle it amicably, respecting the love that once was. After Daniel left the house, presumably to meet with a lawyer, I found myself alone with my thoughts. The finality of our conversation had left me drained, yet there was an underlying sense of relief. The veil of pretense had been lifted, and in its place was a clarity that had been missing for years. I wandered into the living room, my eyes falling on the paintings that adorned the walls. They were remnants of a passion I had long forgotten, my love for digital art. In the early years of our marriage, I would spend hours creating vibrant landscapes and abstract designs, losing myself in the colors and shapes. But as my marriage began to crumble, so did my desire to create. Standing there, surrounded by my own art, a spark ignited within me. It was a reminder of who I was before, a woman with dreams, passions, and a zest for life. A woman who deserved more than the shadows of a loveless marriage. In that moment, I made a decision. I would not only reclaim my life, but also my passion. I would start painting again, not just to fill the void left by my broken marriage, but to rediscover the part of me that I had lost along the way. With renewed purpose, I turned on my computer and opened my digital art software, a familiar welcome screen greeting me. It felt like coming home. As I began to sketch, the lines and colors flowing effortlessly from my fingertips, a sense of peace enveloped me. It was the peace of a woman who had faced her fears, who had taken the first step towards a new beginning. Days turned into weeks as I navigated the murky waters of divorce proceedings. Despite the amicability we had agreed upon, each meeting with Daniel felt like retracing steps in a dance we no longer understood. However, amidst this turmoil, I found solace in my rediscovered passion for digital art. The more I immersed myself in my creations, the more I felt the pieces of my old self falling back into place. One evening, as I sat in front of my computer, lost in a complex design, a series of pings from my phone broke my concentration. It was Ethan, our son. "Mom, can we have dinner this weekend?" "I have some news," his message read. Ethan had been our one constant source of joy. His light-hearted nature and youthful optimism had often been the glue that held us together in our darker days. I replied immediately, agreeing to the dinner. Saturday arrived, and I found myself sitting across from Ethan at our favorite Italian restaurant. He had the same sparkling eyes and easy smile that had always reminded me of Daniel in our happier times. "So, what's this news you have?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan's smile widened. "I'm getting engaged," he announced, his excitement contagious. I felt a burst of happiness for him, mixed with a tinge of sadness for the family life we could no longer give him. "That's wonderful, Ethan. Tell me about her." As Ethan shared stories about his fiancée, his plans for the future, I couldn't help but reflect on the cycle of life. Here was my son, on the cusp of building his own life, his own family, while mine was unraveling. The dinner continued with light-hearted chatter, but my mind kept drifting back to Daniel. I wondered if he knew about Ethan's engagement, if it mattered to him at all. Driving home later that evening, a sense of loneliness enveloped me. The house that once echoed with the laughter and arguments of a family now stood silent, a monument to a life that once was. In the days that followed, as I worked on my art, I found myself reflecting on the bonds that had once tied us as a family. Ethan had always been our anchor, but even he couldn't prevent the drifting apart of two people who had lost their way. My thoughts were often interrupted by memories of Daniel's recent interactions with Julia, his coworker. I remembered the late-night calls, the weekend meetings that he insisted were for work. I had trusted him, never questioning his loyalty. But now doubt crept in, its insidious tendrils wrapping around my heart. Was there more to Daniel's relationship with Julia than just work? The thought nagged at me, an itch that I couldn't quite reach. I remembered the casual touches, the shared laughs, the way they seemed to exist in a world of their own during company functions. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of these thoughts. It didn't matter now. Daniel and I were on separate paths, our journey together, nothing but a memory. As I continued to delve into my art, I realized it was more than just a hobby. It was my lifeline, pulling me away from the edge of despair. With each stroke of my digital brush, I felt a sense of purpose, a reminder that there was life beyond the ruins of a failed marriage. The weeks leading up to Ethan's engagement party were a blur of activity and mixed emotions. While I busied myself with preparations, a part of me dreaded the event. It would be the first family gathering since Daniel and I had decided to divorce, and the thought of facing him in a room full of people filled me with unease. The day of the party arrived, and the atmosphere was festive, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Ethan and his fiancée, a charming young woman named Anna, were the picture of happiness. Watching them, a sense of melancholy washed over me. They were beginning their journey together, full of hopes and dreams, while mine with Daniel was coming to an end. As guests mingled, I caught sight of Daniel across the room. Our eyes met briefly, 1,000 words passing between us in that silent exchange. He looked older, more tired, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of the old affection. But it was quickly replaced by the stark reality of our situation. The evening progressed, and I found myself in conversation with some of Ethan's friends. Their youthful enthusiasm was infectious, and for a while I forgot the complexities of my own life. It was then that I noticed Daniel talking to Julia in a corner of the room. They were laughing, their heads close together in a way that was intimately familiar. The sight struck a nerve, and a surge of emotions welled up inside me. The doubts that had been simmering in my mind came to the forefront. The more I observed them, the clearer it became. There was something between them, something more than just professional camaraderie. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, the realization of Daniel's betrayal hitting me like a wave. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing outside, taking in the cool night air. The sounds of the party faded into the background, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Ethan joined me, his expression softening as he saw my troubled face. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, concern etched in his voice. I forced a smile. "Yes, I'm fine, just a little tired, that's all." Ethan looked at me, his eyes searching for the truth. "Mom, you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" I nodded, grateful for his support. "I know, honey, and I will. Just not tonight." He hugged me, a gesture of comfort that brought tears to my eyes. As he went back inside, I stood there, feeling the weight of the evening. The drive home was a reflection of my thoughts, long and winding. The sight of Daniel and Julia together had confirmed my suspicions, and with that confirmation came a sense of closure. I realized that it was time to let go, not just of Daniel, but of the life we had built together. As I lay in bed that night, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. The laughter, the music, and most of all, Daniel and Julia. It was the end of a chapter, but as with all endings, there was also the promise of a new beginning. In the weeks following Ethan's engagement party, I found myself in a state of introspection. The revelation of Daniel's relationship with Julia, though painful, had given me a sense of closure. It was as if a final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, allowing me to see the complete picture of our failed marriage. With this newfound clarity, I threw myself into my art with a vigor I hadn't felt in years. My digital canvases became a kaleidoscope of emotions, each piece reflecting a different facet of my journey: pain, hope, resilience. It was therapeutic, a way to channel my feelings into something tangible and beautiful. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings were moving along, albeit slowly. Daniel and I had settled into a routine of distant yet cordial interactions, a far cry from the turbulent exchanges of our earlier meetings. It was a strange kind of dance, two people moving around each other, careful not to step on old wounds. One afternoon, as I sat working on a particularly intricate design, my phone rang. It was the lawyer, informing me that the divorce was finalized. The words hit me with an unexpected force. Even though I had been preparing for this moment, the finality of it left me feeling oddly hollow. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The young, hopeful woman who had married Daniel, full of dreams and aspirations, was now a more mature, seasoned version of herself. I had lost some of my naivety, but in its place I had gained strength and a deeper understanding of myself. One evening, as I sat gazing at the latest piece I had created, a vibrant depiction of a phoenix rising from the ashes, Ethan called. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, his voice serious. We met at a small cafe the next day. Ethan's expression was a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Anna and I were talking, and we'd like you to move in with us after we get married," he blurted out. The offer took me by surprise. "Ethan, I can't intrude on your new life like that," I protested, touched by his concern but wary of imposing. "It's not an intrusion, Mom. We want you there. Anna loves the idea, and I don't want you to be alone." His words warmed my heart. Here was my son, embarking on a new chapter in his life, yet still looking out for me. It was a testament to the bond we shared, one that had only grown stronger through the trials of the past year. After much discussion, I agreed. It was a new beginning, not just for Ethan and Anna, but for me as well. A chance to be part of their life, to share in their joys and challenges, while also giving myself the space to continue my own journey. As I packed up my belongings over the next few weeks, I felt a sense of bittersweet nostalgia. Each item, each piece of art, was a reminder of a life lived, of lessons learned, and of the resilience that had carried me through. Moving day arrived, and as I stepped into Ethan and Anna's home, I felt a sense of belonging. It was a new environment, but one that was filled with love and warmth. Ethan and Anna had gone out of their way to make me feel welcome, setting up a small studio for me to continue my art. In the days that followed, I found a new rhythm to my life. I spent my mornings working on my art, exploring new techniques and styles. In the evenings, I would join Ethan and Anna for dinner, sharing stories and laughter. It was during one of these dinners that Ethan turned to me, a serious look in his eyes. "Mom, how are you really doing? After everything with Dad, I mean." I took a moment to reflect, then smiled. "I'm doing okay, Ethan. Better than okay, actually. I've found a new purpose in my art, and being here with you and Anna has given me a sense of family that I thought I had lost." Ethan smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "I'm glad, Mom. You deserve to be happy." As we continued our dinner chatting about everything and nothing, I realized that this was what healing looked like. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic change, but a gradual rebuilding of oneself, piece by piece. And as I looked around the table, at the faces of my son and his fiancée, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. In this new beginning, I had found not just a place to live, but a home. Living with Ethan and Anna brought a sense of harmony and companionship that I hadn't realized I was missing. Their youthful energy and love for each other were infectious, and I found myself looking forward to the simple pleasures of our daily life together. One afternoon, as I was setting up my art supplies in the small studio Ethan had arranged for me, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Hesitantly, I opened it, and to my surprise, it was from Julia, Daniel's coworker. "Sarah, can we meet? There's something I need to tell you about Daniel," the message read. My heart skipped a beat. What could Julia possibly have to say about Daniel now after all this time? Curiosity piqued. I agreed to meet her at a nearby cafe the next day. Sitting across from Julia, I noticed the nervousness in her eyes. She fidgeted with her coffee cup before speaking. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Daniel and we had an affair. It started before your divorce. I didn't realize the extent of the damage we were causing." Her confession, though not entirely unexpected, still stung. I had suspected their relationship, but hearing it confirmed brought back a flood of emotions. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Julia sighed, a look of genuine remorse on her face. "I ended things with Daniel. It was wrong, and I regret it deeply. I just thought you deserved to know the truth." I sat there, processing her words. Part of me wanted to be angry, to lash out at the woman who had been part of my marriage's downfall. But another part, the part that had found peace and moved on, simply felt pity. "Julia, what's done is done," I said finally. "I appreciate you telling me, but I've moved on. I hope you can too." Leaving the cafe, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Julia's confession had closed the final chapter on a part of my life that was now firmly in the past. Over the next few months, my life settled into a comfortable routine. My art was flourishing, with several pieces being featured in local exhibitions. Ethan and Anna's wedding was fast approaching, and the excitement in the house was palpable. As I watched Ethan and Anna together, so full of love and hope for the future, I couldn't help but reflect on my own journey. The pain of the past had given way to a quiet strength, a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The wedding day arrived, a beautiful ceremony filled with laughter, tears, and an overwhelming sense of joy. Watching Ethan and Anna exchange their vows, I felt an immense pride for the man my son had become. After the wedding, as guests mingled and danced, I found myself standing alone for a moment, taking it all in. It was then that I saw Daniel, standing a short distance away, watching me. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, time stood still. There was so much I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted to ask. But as I looked at him, I realized that none of it mattered anymore. Daniel nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us. Then, turning away, he disappeared into the crowd. As I rejoined the celebration, a sense of peace settled over me. My journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had led me here, to this moment of contentment and hope. Life, I realized, was a tapestry of experiences, each thread woven with its own story. Some were dark, others bright, but all were essential in creating the larger picture. And as I danced with Ethan, my heart full of love and gratitude, I knew that my tapestry was still being woven, each day adding a new and beautiful thread to the story of my life.